Welcome to episode 5 of the CompTIA PenTest Plus training series, and this is a continuation of our very first chapter, which is the engagement management, and this is module 1, chapter 1. So engagement management holds 13% of the PenTest Plus examination, and we've gone through every single section with the exception of this last one, which is analyzing findings and providing remediation. And then the very next chapter is going to be reconnaissance and enumeration, and we're going to start actually going into techniques and everything else. So if you've been watching so far and you're more excited about all of the techniques and you're kind of over the theory, which I can understand because PenTest Plus is really exciting because you're going to be, the idea is to pen test, right? The idea is to start hacking. So we just needed to go through all of the engagement management stuff because it's a very important piece of the big puzzle, and it sets the foundation for everything else that we're going to be talking about. So in today's video, we're going to go through the analyzing findings and providing remediation that covers technical controls, administrative controls, operational controls, and physical controls. And then in the next episode, we're going to begin chapter 2 or module 2, which is reconnaissance and enumeration. And then we're going to start going through a bunch of different techniques, and that's where the fun really begins. So I do require, or I do recommend, there you go, that's the word. I do suggest and recommend that you maintain a little bit more patience and just kind of hang in there so that we can get to the technical elements of it and start using all these various techniques. That being said, we're going to be talking about analyzing findings and providing remediation in this episode today. To get the PenTest Plus notes, practice questions, and to join a supportive community of like-minded people like you, consider joining the Hackaholics Anonymous membership community. We have 4 tiers: the supporter, the agent, the guardian, and the master. And each tier gets their own Discord server and early access to content. The agent, guardian, and master levels will get exclusive content like line-by-line code explanations for how to create cybersecurity and PenTest Plus scripts, like exclusive downloads that they will get. For example, the notes document for this PenTest Plus and everything that I'm using for the lectures, as well as all of the practice questions and everything else that will go along that will be made for the scripts and everything else that we're going to be doing for the PenTest Plus training series. There will be free pre-made monthly Python automations that have to do with system administration, cybersecurity defense, as well as, of course, PenTest Plus and ethical hacking. And then there's going to be monthly live streams with me every single month, plus so many other things that you would get as a part of being a member of Hackaholics Anonymous in these tiers. To join, you can simply click the link in the description below, or you can go to our homepage and click the join button there, or you can go to youtube.com/@hankhackshackers/join, and you'll be able to join Hackaholics Anonymous. Now, without further ado, let us continue with PenTest Plus. Okay, so this is where it all leads to. The penetration test, all of the exercises that we would run up until this point all lead to this, right? So you have ran exercises, you have ran various tests, and you have ideally found something that would be of note, something that should be pointed out to the stakeholders. And so those would be considered your findings, and you would need to analyze your findings and provide a remediation for any vulnerability that you've found, whether it was critical or severe, whatever it is. You need to be able to, at the very least, say, okay, this is what we found, and this is what we would recommend you to do to remediate. I don't know if the cost of it would be worth it or whatever. You don't even need to say any of that. It's just say, this is what I found, and this is what I would do to remediate those findings, and then let the management, let the head of the security team and the head of the IT team communicate with upper management to see whether or not it would be beneficial for them and cost efficient enough, or if the cost would be worth it for them to actually remediate. But that's pretty much the whole, this is like where it all leads to. This is literally the goal of a penetration test, is to find whatever the findings are, to find whatever the vulnerabilities are and patch them or remediate them in advance before any malicious actor can take advantage of them. So if the findings are properly analyzed and actionable remediation steps are provided, The goal of this phase is to help security teams and decision makers understand the vulnerabilities, prioritize them, and implement fixes that reduce the risk. And this is what we're going to be talking about in this section. So how do you analyze the findings from a penetration test? What are technical controls, which falls under everything that has to do with the systems themselves, with the technology themselves? So system hardening, multi-factor authentication, encryption, patching, any of that stuff. Administrative controls. So what is administrative controls, and then how do you implement these types of controls? And as the name implies, it has to do with the administration. So role-based access control or rule-based access control technically falls under administrative controls. Secure software development lifecycle, security policies, training, technically that it's kind of under operational controls. But I've also, when I was studying for CompTIA at CYSA Plus, they mentioned training would fall under administrative controls. So it could be either or. For the purposes of the PT0-003 CompTIA PenTest Plus, training, user training, has fallen under operational controls. So just keep that in mind. It is different from where you would go through when you went through CYSA Plus, if you did go through CYSA Plus. Operational controls themselves would be job rotation, right? So this all falls under how the business operates and what the mechanisms themselves are as far as the business itself is concerned. Not so much the technology, but the business itself. So you have the job rotation, right? So not one person should be serving a 24-hour cycle for a variety of different reasons. So you would have job rotation, and it's also responsibility rotation that kind of falls under access restrictions as well. But it's like, you don't want one person to have access to everything. You don't want one person to be responsible for everything. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. User training, very, very important. The biggest, weakest link inside of the security chain is the training of users or lack thereof, right? So if users aren't properly trained, and if they don't know not to click on something, or if they don't know not to visit a link or open an attachment that they don't recognize, if any of those things happen, you're letting somebody into the organization. So therefore, it falls under somebody making a human error. And of course, access restrictions, which is actually a part of the OWASP top 10. We actually went through the OWASP top 10 list in one of the previous videos, and in the framework video. And access restrictions is a really, really big piece of it. It's actually in the top 10 list. I think it was actually number 1, if I remember correctly, where somebody got access to things that they shouldn't have access to, and now there's an issue because if a hacker gets the credentials of that person, they get access to all of those things that person is authorized to access. Therefore, they can essentially do things that they shouldn't be able to do as that specific user. So restricting access to the zero trust or to the concept of least privilege, so they don't get anything that they don't need for their job. They only have access to things that they actually need. Physical control, so biometrics, video surveillance, access control, and this falls under access control to a building, for example, or to a segment of a building. Video surveillance, CCTV cameras, biometrics, right? So eye scans or fingerprint scans, or the access cards, right? Security cards for somebody to get in, where only one person has a given card, and that card is connected to that person's identity. So if somebody uses that card to come in, it's as if, John Smith just walked into the building. And if John Smith was out of the country on vacation, it's like, oh, this is a red flag. John Smith isn't even supposed to be in the country. What the hell is going on here? So these are just the various, and I'm kind of giving you a brief overview of them, but that's essentially what this stuff is. And the remediations that we will be talking about fall under either one of these controls that you'll see here. And then just analyzing findings is your whole job after you've ran the penetration test, to try to see the severity of those findings, the impact of those findings, and what needs to be done to remediate those findings. Is it any of these controls that needs to be done to remediate your findings? In order to analyze your findings, you have to perform triage. Now, triage is actually a concept that I was first introduced to when it came down to the medical field. And I was watching some show, I think it was probably Grey's Anatomy or something, where they do triage inside of the trauma center or the trauma room or whatever it is. And somebody would come in and you quickly have to triage. But in this case, you're not limited to the amount of time. I mean, it needs to be within the scope of the penetration test time limits themselves, or it shouldn't take too long. But essentially, the concept of triage is analyzing the vulnerability and then categorizing it, prioritizing it, and determining whether or not it has really high impact, how exploitable it actually is, and essentially looking at the various elements of it. So, for example, somebody comes in the medical world, somebody comes in and they're bleeding heavily from a wound in their chest. It's like, okay, well, this seems to be really significant. We need to address this immediately. Versus another person comes in and they're like, oh, I fell and I sprained my ankle and now my ankle really hurts. I think I may have broken my ankle or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, most likely that's not an emergent type of a situation, and you don't need immediate attention right away. You could just sit here, we'll give you some morphine and some painkillers. You should be fine, right? Unless there's some kind of infection or something like that. If it's just a broken bone in your foot or something like that, you should be fine. Somebody who's bleeding out of their chest, that's more emergent. And that's what triage essentially means, right? It's like you're looking at the situation and you're saying, okay, what is the severity of all of these vulnerabilities that we just found? And what is the most critical one that we need to address immediately? What's the most severe one that we need to address immediately? And then what are the ones that we can kind of put off for a couple of weeks or a couple of months before we address them, because we have more severe things that we need to worry about? So the key factors in the triage process in vulnerability analysis is the severity level. So is it critical, high, medium, low? We already talked about the CVSS scoring or the OWASP risk rating process. So just based on those scoring systems, you would look at the severity level and, okay, if the critical ones need to be addressed before the low ones. It's like very common sense. Exploitability is, can it be easily exploited? And this actually has a lot to do with how severe it actually is. So exploitability is a big part of the scoring system to try to find something severity. But it's also something that we need to just really look at standalone as well. It may not necessarily be super high impact, but it can easily be exploited. And that would be one of those things that somebody would make an executive decision and say, hey, you know what, we need to also address this immediately as well. So if it can easily be exploited, then we need to address it immediately. What is the business impact and the likelihood of the attack? These are the three different areas that we would really look at outside of the CVSS scoring system itself. So the CVSS scoring system tells you, okay, you know, do they need network access? Do they need local access? And it goes in a little bit more granular. Do they need privileges? Does it have an impact on our availability? Does it have an impact on confidentiality, on the integrity? It starts looking at very specifics, right? But if you wanted to look at it just as kind of like an overview, you say, okay, well, how easy is it to exploit this system? What would be the impact on our systems or on our business if they actually were able to exploit this vulnerability? Is it going to cause financial damage? Is it going to cause reputational damage? Or is it something that they would just come and they would kind of, stop our printers from working? I don't know, it's like a stupid example, but would they cause a denial of service attack? Would they cause actual legitimate damage to our sensitive data, our critical data? Intellectual property, for example. Let's say you only have one server, you have no redundancies, no redundant servers, no backup servers that houses your intellectual property. So that would be a really big deal if they were able to damage that server or bring that server down or cause it to, burn out, whatever it may be. So it'll impact the business severely, right? And then what's the likelihood of the attack? Is it actively being exploited in the wild? Are we actively a target of this specific type of attack, right? So if you work for a government agency and you are in cahoots with, or you're kind of clashing with another government agency or another country's government, are you likely to be attacked, right? So this is one of those things that's like a really big deal. I feel like this is actually a really good time to look at the attack map. This is something that I like looking at kind of regularly, just to really re-optimize my approach to this whole process of security and really understand the scope of how crazy it actually is. So let me just show you an example of what it looks like around the globe using these various attack maps that are available. This is the live attack map from Kaspersky website. So you can literally just go to cybermap.kaspersky.com and you'll be able to find this. And you can see that there's essentially a bunch of different little beams of light that are going from various locations across the world to other locations. And there are beams of light that are leaving a location and beams of light that are landing at a location. And so we can see that there are certain attacks coming into the United States, leaving the United States. We can see that there is certain attacks that are getting into and leaving Russia. And Russia currently seems to be the most attacked country. The number one most attacked country is Russia. And then if we break this down, we can look at a variety of different countries as well. It goes alphabetically, so it doesn't go by the number of attacks, but I would presume that the United States is probably up there as well. So if we do United States, where's the US? Where can I find the US? Well, for whatever reason, it seems like it's not even on this list. So let me see if I can find the United States, because that's kind of crazy. It should be under U. It's funny that it's not. So that's actually really interesting to me. Maybe it's not under America either. That is actually really funny that the US is not on here. Assuming that the US is not under attack or doesn't get enough of an attack for it to show up, which is crazy because I know for a fact that we definitely get attacked over here. We can see maybe Iran is like a good one. Iran is number 26. So Iran is on the OFAC list. It's a terrorist country. Essentially, this is it though. Like this is kind of the visual that you would get to be able to find something, or to be able to just get an understanding of the number of attacks that are happening live across the globe from one country to another country, which is really, really crazy to think about. And it's a lot, as you can see. There's a lot of stuff going on, especially with Russia. Maybe we can look at China. China might be another good one that we can see if there's a lot of attacks going on against China. Oh, China is number 2. So there you go. Russia is number 1. China is number 2, most attacked country. Now, the attacks that are leaving these locations, it's always good to kind of keep in mind that it could be that there is a proxy server that's being used, that's housed in this country, to make it seem like the attack is leaving that country. So let's say if an attack is leaving from this particular location, no idea what this is, but it seems like there's a lot of stuff leaving that location. So if there's an attack that's leaving this specific location, whoa, let me see what I can find here. I don't know what this is, but there's a lot of, it's only outgoing. Everything that's going from this point right here is an outgoing attack that's going out. So it might be that this country is actually doing it, or it might be that there is a series of proxy servers that are located in this location that the attack is leaving from, right? So I'm kind of going off on a tangent right now, but essentially it gives you an understanding of the attacks as they leave, right? Where they're leaving from, where they're landing to, and how frequent it actually is. And it's literally nonstop. So it's happening like probably hundreds, if not thousands per minute. So it's a pretty crazy thing to think about. So when we're thinking about the likelihood of an attack, you can look at that attack map and be like, okay, well, I mean, based on that information, it is pretty likely that something can take place because there's a lot of stuff going on all the time. So is it that our country would be under attack? So if you work for China or Russia and you're looking at something that is a vulnerability inside of your system, you're one of the top 2 attacked countries in the world. So there's probably a likelihood that you're going to be attacked, especially if you work for the government of those countries. So if that is indeed the case, then you need to put a critical rating to whatever that severity is. If it's easily exploited and if it will cause a really big impact against your infrastructure, then you need to just assume that the likelihood is also very high. Even if it may not be, you just need to assume that it is, and it would be ranked critical. Therefore, you would need to go ahead and address it immediately. So this is a part of the triage process. This is how you look at a vulnerability and you triage it to see what severity level it should be ranked, and then how quickly you need to go ahead and address it. So here's the example of prioritization, right? The severity thing. I just noticed that this was collapsed. The table that we're using didn't have enough space for it. So that's supposed to say severity. So we have the severity, example, vulnerability, risk level, and then the action required. So if it's a critical level vulnerability, for example, an unpatched remote code execution, meaning somebody can execute code remotely from a different country, they could execute code on your system. You need to fix that immediately. This is a warning, like an alarm, right? And you need to fix that right away, because I mean, they could execute code remotely. They could do whatever the hell they want on your systems. So the applying of the security patch would be like a really big concept that we would do in this particular case. Apply a security patch, update the system, do whatever it is you need to do. Maybe use a different thing if you can't apply a security patch to it. Harden the system. If somebody can execute code remotely, maybe you just need to block off that port completely that will give them access to it, or block off the system completely. Something needs to be done immediately to make sure that that system and that port, that service, is not available for people to try to hack into. If it's high level, it would be SQL injection in a web application. Fix it within the next 30 days. This could also be ranked as a critical vulnerability, just depending on what kind of data is being housed inside of that relational database. Fix it within 30 days, right away, I would presume. Implement parameterized queries, meaning that the queries that are being submitted are going to be verified via the parameters that are allowed to be sent to the web server, to the database server. You can also do input sanitization on the client side, meaning through the web browser. You can also do input sanitization on the server side, meaning if by whatever chance they were able to bypass the web browser, and it gets to the server should also sanitize the input, meaning essentially just don't process whatever input would be considered as unauthorized input. Medium would be insecure TLS configuration. So TLS is for the encryption certificates. So fix it within 60 days. Disable weak ciphers, for example, TLS 1.0. Upgrade to higher versions of TLS, or if you're running SSL, upgrade to TLS. So any kind of cipher, any kind of weak cipher or weak encryption should obviously be updated, but it's not as crazy if it's on a web server or if it's on some kind of application or communication that houses really sensitive information. Then I would say that this goes up in the rankings and it should be addressed sooner than later, maybe not 60 days, because it's housing really, really sensitive information. And if it has weak encryption, that means that it can actually be bypassed. And even as we speak, there's now quantum computing that can actually break through these encryptions relatively quickly. So now there's quantum ciphers. There are quantum cryptographic algorithms that have been generated to secure against quantum computers being used to decrypt something. And again, like a country like Russia or a country like the United States or a country like China, these like powerhouse countries need to consider this as something that then it needs to be upgraded immediately, especially with like the treasury computers or the treasury servers or some kind of crazy, the power grid stuff. Like anything that is housing critical infrastructure or critical data should be looked at as far as an upgrade is concerned. And then low level stuff would be missing security headers. This is like, okay, well, it's whatever. Add HTTP security headers, CSP or HSTS or whatever it is, like fix it whenever you get a chance. It's not that big of a deal to have missing security headers unless the guy, whoever is attacking you, is so freaking skilled at poisoning the HTTP requests that are being sent out, that they can somehow bypass or take advantage of those missing security headers. But this is just an example, like a triage kind of an example of looking at a vulnerability, saying, okay, based on the impact, essentially, this is kind of what we're looking at here, right? So if they can execute remote code, that is going to have really, really high impact against your computers and against your systems and your business as a whole. So that needs to be addressed immediately. And if it's a missing security header, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't have that much of an impact, especially if it's against a website or a web page that's just not that big of a deal. It's like an informational web page, right? It just says, hey, this is our about page. This is what our company's history is. Like, who cares, right? So those are the web pages that, I mean, they're not, you don't even have to worry about them. But if it's a login, if it's an admin login page and it's missing security headers, that's probably something that you need to address sooner than later. Don't say fix when possible. Be like, fix sooner than later, because the impact could be really great, right? It's an admin login page. It's kind of a big deal. So yeah, these were just some of the examples. Okay, so now we need to talk about the various control types that we can implement to secure our systems and to remediate the vulnerabilities that we have found. Technical controls applies to hardening systems and preventing exploits through security configurations and technology-based defenses. So technical, right? It has to do with the tech itself, the technology itself. The first version of this is system hardening, and hardening is just another word for strengthening, right? So you would strengthen your operating system or harden your operating system. You would harden your applications, you would harden your network devices against attacks. So disabling unused services is one of the most common ones. So it reduces the attack surface. So you would disable SMBv1 or you would disable SSH, Secure Shell, because you don't use it ever. It has nothing to do with any of your business operations and nobody needs to log in through SSH. So just disable SSH. It's like, it's one of the most basic versions of hardening a system, is disabling any of the services that are never used. And if somebody ever does need to use them, they should only be accessible on one given computer or one given IP address. And it's because it's so unique and so specialized that only one person in the IT team needs to use it. Therefore, only one IP address has access to that service, etc., etc. So on every other computer, on every other IP address, it's disabled, right? Applying the principle of least privilege. So you only get permission to do things for your job function. Anything outside of your job function, you don't have permission to do. It's just limiting the user's permission only to the things that they just need to do, right? They don't have any other reason to do any other thing. It only fits inside of their job function. Therefore, you get the maximum amount of privilege to do your job. Apart from that, you have no other privileges. Enforcing secure configuration. So harden your cloud services, harden your network appliances, make sure that you're using, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, make sure that you're using multi-factor authentication. That's technically a security configuration. Make sure that your storage buckets, if you have a cloud service, for example, Amazon S3. This is one of the examples that just comes up in my mind a lot when we talk about this, because it was something that we talked about in the Security Plus playlist when I was creating that training series. There was an example of a company, forget the name of the company, but essentially they had S3 buckets. S3 buckets are like storage buckets for Amazon Web Services. And the S3 bucket was public facing. The IP address for that S3 bucket was public facing. Anybody from anywhere could access that storage bucket, which is like, okay, well, that's kind of a big deal. That's a very important security configuration that somebody misconfigured, and now that IP address is accessible from anyone across the world with no authorization or no authentication, meaning no login or anything required. And you know, if there's sensitive data inside of that storage bucket, you are really just asking for it. You're leaving yourself up to a really big vulnerability. So that's like one of these security configurations that needs to be addressed. Same thing with network appliances. You know, it's like, make sure that all of the ports that are unused on your network switches are disabled. No port should be enabled, and whatever port is actually enabled, there should only be one IP address that is allowed to access that port. No other IP address should be allowed to access that port on that switch. That's kind of a configuration that can be done on your network appliances. Using secure boot and firmware protections, so preventing rootkits and malware from actually being able to launch on your computer or on your machine, on your web server, when the machine boots, right? So if the machine is booting for the first time or it's rebooting, you need to have secure boot configurations in place, or firmware protections configurations that are in place to make sure that rootkits are not able to launch from that machine or maybe even be installed to that machine. Same thing for malware, just preventing these things from actually going through. So secure boot is a pretty basic feature that comes with pretty much every operating system, every machine, and it's your choice to use it or not use it. So the recommendation would be to use it, especially if it's a critical system that is housing a lot of data that's very important to the company. You would use secure boot on that specific machine. Multi-factor authentication would be our next technical control, and so this prevents password-based attacks, for example, brute force attacks or credential stuffing, and we'll talk about those when we actually get to that section. So even if an attacker steals a password, they can't log in without a second authentication factor. And so those could be either something that you know, something that you have, or something that you are. And typically something that you know is like the very most basic thing, which would be your password or a PIN number or something. The next thing would be something that you have. So a mobile authenticator app like Google Authenticator or Authy, these are required, or they would be installed on your mobile device, on your cell phone. And so as long as you have your mobile device, and then you can go ahead and open up your Authenticator app and then use that time-based password or time-based authentication code, essentially, in conjunction with your password. So you would log in using your email and password, and then it'll say, okay, enter your mobile authenticator code, right? Or if you have a smart card, which would be used to scan into the building, for example, or a USB thumb drive that only houses a key that you would use as a physical key to get into a computer, and you just, once you log in, you plug in the USB thumb drive, and then that acts as a physical key. And then something that you are would be biometrics, right? So a fingerprint or a facial recognition, or your eye scan or whatever, that would be your biometrics that would be used. So it could be, it's at least one, or I would say at least two of these things. And the most common is the password and some kind of a authenticator one-time code, or something that gets text or emailed to you. That's the most basic version of this. For best practice, you would use the time-based one-time password. So TOTP is a time-based one-time password, and that would be a Google Authenticator or an Authy, because literally it expires like every 10 seconds or something. So the code just resets every 10 seconds. So as long as you have pre-configured your computer or your email or something to connect to Google Authenticator or Authy, then it'll just do a reset every 10 seconds. And so that time-based one-time password is a really, really solid one. Avoiding SMS-based multi-factor authentication, which is vulnerable to SIM swapping. So if somebody actually can get your SIM card or somehow get a duplicate SIM card issued and then just put that inside of their phone. And then there are even some, I would say, range-based, like if somebody's close enough to your cell phone, they can, there are some attacks that they can do where they can intercept your text messages. And so if they're close enough to you, they can, get the one-time password text, and then all of a sudden you can actually, you see it in your phone, but they also see it because they're intercepting your text messages. And by the time that you figure out what the hell's going on, they can log into whatever your computer is or whatever your account is and do the damage that they need to do. So it's kind of important to just keep that in mind. If you can avoid SMS-based, use email, if anything, or use the time-based one-time password authentications. Our next technical control would be encryption and data protection, and this is mainly to protect data, and data could be either at rest, meaning it's just sitting on a computer or sitting in some kind of a hard drive somewhere, or in your email, let's say, which is technically sitting at rest in somebody else's server. It could be in transit, so data is being emailed back and forth, or it's being transferred back and forth from one hard drive to another drive. And it could also be processing, so data is actually being processed, it's being rendered, whatever it's actually going through for it to be considered being processed, and it needs to be also encrypted in that situation as well, in that state as well. So you have data at rest, data in transit, and data during processing. Those are the various states that data would be in at any given time. So when you have data, you need to look at encryption, especially if it's sensitive data, right? So if it's public data, if it's data that's accessible to anybody just by visiting your about page, not really that big of a deal. If it's sensitive data, customer data, financial data, that has to be encrypted. It's not even a choice, right? And there's a variety of different ways that you can encrypt data during these different states. So AES 256 Advanced Encryption Standard for encrypting sensitive data. You can also have 512. You can also have 1000 something. So it's like there's different versions of it. And of course, there's the quantum encryptions that are now recently available as well that you can consider, especially if you have really sensitive data and you're some kind of government agency or representative for a government agency. That's something that you need to consider. TLS 1.2 or 1.3 has to do with web traffic. So it encrypts web traffic. And obviously, if you can, you would use 1.3 or the most recent version of TLS, depending on when you're watching this or when you're going through this process. You would just want to use the most recent version of TLS to make sure that you encrypt your web traffic and your website. And then we have RSA 4096/4096/ECC, which are key exchanges. So you have secure key exchanges for SSL or TLS, which happens to be a asymmetric, which essentially means that there's a public key and a private key, and somebody would go ahead and encrypt their data using their public key, and then in order for somebody else to be able to access it, they would use their private key to decrypt the data. And so a web browser is the most common version of this. A web server, for example, Google is what I'm using for this presentation, right? And you're watching this through YouTube. So if you click on, I'll show you this just to kind of give you a little bit of a demonstration, because it's always really, really good to know these things. So if you go over here, and then there's this little button right here. Usually, sometimes depending on the browser, it's like a lock icon. So if you click on this, it'll open this thing right here. And it says connection is secure, right? And then we can go ahead and click on the connection is secure. And then it says certificate is valid. I click on that, and then it'll open up the certificate information for google.com. And this applies to any of their subdomains on google.com. And then you can see this right here. So you have the public key, the SHA-256 hash value of their public key, and this is what they used to encrypt the data. Now, I logged in to my Google account using my email and password. Therefore, that was my version of a private key, and that completes the asymmetric encryption standard so that I can access all of the information that's in my Google Drive and in my email, etc. So if somebody gets access to my password for whatever, and I mean, my passwords are very complex these days. I don't use basic passwords. I use long sentences. And then there's numbers and characters and capitalizations and all these things. And I do it mainly because I don't like random passwords. I just want to be able to remember my password, so I'll use long sentences, right? And that ends up being a very complex password. So if somebody even has the opportunity to actually, for whatever, they're super skilled, or I don't know, a really lucky guess or something, if they can guess that password, Google is still going to say, hey, you need to do your MFA, because I have MFA turned on all of my accounts, and my MFAs are not basic MFAs. They're really strong MFAs that connect to my mobile device through one-time based passwords, right? So it's one of those things where even if they're, for whatever reason, able to decrypt your private key by getting access to your password or something like that, then there still needs to be a multi-factor authentication that's enabled to make it really, really difficult for somebody to get access to your Google documents or to your email. Google Docs, it's not that big of a deal. These are just notes and things like that, and I give these notes away to my students anyway, so I'm not really that worried about the notes. But my email accounts, so some of my email accounts are connected to my bank. So it's like, you don't want that to happen. They're connected to my crypto wallet. You don't want that to happen. It's like if somebody gets access to your email that's connected to your bank account, technically they can just reset your bank account password and verify it by logging into your email, and you are screwed at that point. So, strong passwords. I'm going on a few tangents here, but strong passwords are really important, and using MFA, multi-factor authentication, is very, very important. So let us move on. So the best practices for encryption would be to encrypt all of your sensitive data, so customer records, financial transactions, anything that would be considered sensitive data to you or your organization, and enable full disk encryption when possible. So using something like BitLocker or Lux for devices to actually encrypt the entire disk, not just certain folders that contain data. And if you really want to be like awesome, you encrypt the data that's inside of the folder, and you also encrypt the disk. And now you're like, oof, you're covered on multiple layers. So that would be, I would say, the best approach to the concept of encryption. And I mean, just get into the habit of using super strong passwords and making sure that you use multi-factor authentication and all of these different things. If you need to communicate with somebody, if you need to send them certain messages, you can be using VPN, virtual private networks, to encrypt the communication channel, right? So, and then that way you would then be able to further ensure that whatever data you're sending is actually encrypted and nobody can access it. So there's a lot of different ways to actually be able to do this. And it's just best practice to be, I would say, as paranoid as possible. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I'd rather be too secure than not secure enough, right? It goes back to that old saying that it's better to be a warrior in a garden than to be a gardener in war. So just keep that in mind, right? So you want to make sure that it's better to do the most than the least. Let's just say it like that. Next technical control would be patching and vulnerability management. So 80% of breaches are caused by unpatched vulnerabilities. And if you go through the Security Plus playlist, the Security Plus training series, literally so many situations, because I did a lot of case studies for each section and each chapter of that course. So many of the freaking case studies against massive freaking companies. Like, we're talking about billion-dollar companies. The main reason that it happened is because they just had a vulnerability that wasn't patched. They had a system that wasn't updated, and whoever the system administrator was, I either took their time or they were high, or I don't know, bro. But whatever the reason was that they didn't patch that system ended up being the reason why that company got hacked, and then they lost millions of dollars. So it's like, okay, bro, it's the most simple freaking thing that can be done. So why not just do it? Like, there was something that I created for Hackaholics Anonymous members that is a Python script, okay, that essentially just runs automation. It runs an automated update of all of the packages on any given system. And you can schedule that automation to run on startup, or you can schedule it to run every day to just run. Like, you don't even have to worry about it anymore. You don't have to worry about manually updating or patching your systems, simply because the fact that there's this little automation that just goes out every single day or every time that you start your system, and it'll just make sure everything is updated and current. And Microsoft will patch vulnerabilities with pretty much, like, I'm not going to say every single version of Microsoft that's launched includes some kind of vulnerability patch, but there are a lot of them that are included in their new updates. And it's so silly to run an old version of Microsoft or Mac OS or Linux when the company, right, like these massive trillion-dollar companies, are putting so much resources in there to make sure that they patch vulnerabilities that are in their operating systems. And all you have to do as the user is just update your freaking system. The next time that an update comes out, just do it. I know people that are so paranoid, bro, that they won't update their system because, yeah, they're trying to steal my data. And I'm like, bro, who are you even for them to want to steal your data? Nobody gives a crap about your stupid data. But when you're going and leaving yourself vulnerable like this, if there's an actual malicious actor out there, they can now hack into your system. Apple doesn't give a damn about your data. Apple actually is so solid with this kind of stuff that I've heard of like drug dealers that will use iPhones because they know that Apple will not succumb to subpoenas from the FBI. So that's how solid Apple is with their customers, that they're willing to protect their customers even against FBI subpoenas, and people still don't patch their Apple phones. It's like, bro, why? Like, why? Anyways. So implement automated patch management. So WSUS, SCCM, Ansible, these are all patch management platforms and softwares that are available. And you can even learn to write your own little script that actually uses APT or YUM or whatever, DPG, any of these things that will go ahead and update your software and your systems automatically. You can prioritize patching critical vulnerabilities. So if you've actually seen the vulnerability inside of the CVE database and it's been ranked as a critical vulnerability, then prioritize patching that mofo immediately. The very first thing should be done would be to patch that one specifically because it's critical, right? And then use virtual patching. So WAF rules, for example, which is a web access I want to say it's web application firewall. There you go. Web application firewall. If immediate patching is not possible. So you can use, I don't think it's web application firewall. I thought WAF stood for web application firewall, but in this particular case, I feel like it stands for something else. So let me just verify this I think it is web application firewall, but let me just verify this real quick. Yes, so it is a web application firewall. For some reason, I thought it meant something else, but no, it is actually a web application firewall, and that is very important to keep in mind. So you can actually use a web application firewall, meaning the reason why it falls under virtual patching is that you could technically log into that web application firewall from any system, any location, as long as you have the appropriate credentials and MFA authority, all of that. Once you actually get into the system, then you can go ahead and use virtual patching mechanisms, or just update the firewall or patch whatever it is on the web application to just make sure that it is as secure as possible. All right, now we can move on to our next set of control protocols, which would be the administrative control protocol. So administrative controls are policy-driven mechanisms. So you have policies within the company, do this, don't do this. Those are policies. And they help the organization enforce the best practices of the company. And essentially, when you have a policy, like an official policy in a company, if somebody goes against that policy, they'll get a formal warning. And then the second time that they go against that policy, they're fired. That's essentially why policies are important and how they can actually be so powerful. Like, hey, John, you did this thing that you shouldn't have done. It's a part of the policy. You went through the training. You know that it's a part of the policy. And it's very, very important. And some of them are zero tolerance kind of stuff. So it's like, if you do certain things that are damaging enough, you are fired, even if it's just your first offense. So policy-driven mechanisms can actually be very powerful. It just needs to be very well disclosed, and people need to be aware of the policies so that they know that something should or should not be done the way that it is. So one of the basic things of this is a role-based access control. And role-based access control is something that's done by the system administrators, the domain administrators, and they give access control to an employee based on their role. So a bank teller should not have the same role controls, right? Access controls that a banker does. They should not have the same access controls that a branch manager does. Now, to that same spirit, a branch manager should not have the same access controls that the regional manager or the district manager or the VP of retail does, right? So these are things that it just, the higher you go up the chain, it's like people below that person should not have the same access control as that person. And then this goes all the way to the top, literally. So the VP of retail will not have the same access controls as the domain administrator, because the VP of retail doesn't need the same access controls as the domain administrator. It's the concept of least privilege. They don't need it. It has nothing to do with their role. So it goes based on your role. Now, one of the things that's really, really nice about this is that Active Directory inside of Microsoft environments makes it really easy to do this, because once you've created a new employee profile, you can just drag them into the folder for branch manager, and they would just get all of the access controls of that folder, and you never have to worry about manually configuring every single user. And same thing applies to LDAP, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, that's for Linux systems, that does similar things where you can manage access to resources and assets and systems based on somebody's role, right? So role-based access control is one of these really simple concepts that you can just ensure that the access to something is restricted based on somebody's responsibilities or the role that they play in the company. So the best practices would be the principle of least privilege. So just make sure that that role inside of Active Directory has only the privileges that it needs. And then when a new employee gets hired on, you just go ahead and drag and drop them inside of that folder. And now that organizational unit, technically that's the name of it, is an organizational unit. Now that OU has all of the privileges that it needs, and then it's just assigned to this new employee right here. So it only gives the minimum access necessary to a given user, and then there's the just-in-time access for temporary admin privileges, essentially giving them temporary access for whatever it is that they would need, and then after a certain set amount of time, it's just automatically revoked. All of those admin privileges that they had for today, for the next 8 hours, at the end of those 8 hours, all the admin privileges are revoked, and you no longer can access any of those systems or do any of the things that an admin is able to do. Our next administrative control is the secure software development lifecycle. So this is a very, very big, important concept, and we've actually talked about this in several videos inside of security engineering. So if you actually go into the security engineering playlist on this channel, we've talked about the SDLC, the software development lifecycle, and then SSDLC is the secure software development lifecycle, and it integrates security into software development from the very beginning. So the best practice is to, there's this concept of shift left or shifting to the left, and the best way that I can explain this is to just show you the graph of the software development lifecycle. But it basically, the whole idea is to do security or think about security as early on as possible. So in the design phase, before you even start coding, if you can think about security in the design phase, that would be amazing. If you can think about security in the coding phase, which is also known as the secure code review concept, that would be amazing. So there's something called static analysis, or SAST. There's also something called dynamic analysis, and dynamic analysis is further along in the development lifecycle, because it's actually when you're running the software that you want to analyze to see if there are any security misconfigurations or security issues that need to be addressed. But static analysis is at looking at the code, and then you look at the code and you're like, oh, this is insecure. You know, you hard coded a password inside of your code. That's a big no-no, right? So it's like certain things like that, or if you can, there's actually a really, really great version of securing the code inside of a script, and the way to do that is to encode all of the commands inside of the script so it just looks like jargon. So if somebody's reading the code with the naked eye without actually decoding it or decrypting, I can't say that you can encrypt it. Maybe you can also encrypt the script itself, but there's encoding that can be done, base 64, base 128, that can be done, that would encode every command inside of the script. And then when you look at it, it's like, it literally looks like a bunch of jargon. It's just a bunch of alphanumeric characters that you cannot make any sense of. So that's actually one of the more cool ways to be able to secure it, but it can technically be decoded. So you can base 64 decode something And once that is done, then you want to make sure that there were no passwords or credentials that were hard-coded into it. There were no API keys that were hard-coded into it. There's just certain things that you just want to make sure that are not hard-coded into the script to prevent from that script being poisoned or somebody stealing data from the script. So the software development lifecycle is something that you need to consider doing all of your security stuff earlier. So let's talk about the shifting left concept just so you can kind of understand it. Now, as you can see here, there are multiple versions of the graphics that are presented for this. A lot of times it's a circular graphic because it is technically a continuous cycle, but this is the original version where the concept of shifting left was actually brought up. So if you look at this right here, there are 6 phases of the development lifecycle. You have analysis, design, development, testing, deployment, and maintenance. And when you're looking at this cycle, right, the concept of shifting left essentially means that instead of going here, right, instead of in the deployment phase trying to look at security and then being like, oh, you know what, holy crap, there's like some issues with this. Now we have to go back to the beginning and start looking at design and development to fix this security issue. Instead of doing this, you shift left. And instead of doing it in the testing phase, you shift left. And instead of doing it in the development phase, you shift left. And so the design phase is typically the best version of this. You can even think about it in the analysis phase. But the design phase is usually where you're talking to the UX and UI designers as well as the system architects and these people that are going to essentially delegate to the developers, the front end and the back end developers. You're going to delegate the instructions to these people and say, hey, build this application or build this code. And in those instructions, you say, I need you to also think about security in these concepts or in these contexts and implement these security controls as you go ahead and start the coding. So these are the best locations. These are the best times to look at security. Now, if you don't do that, then what's going to happen is that during the maintenance element, so let's say they don't even look at it in deployment or testing, in the maintenance element, when it's actually public and it's available to the rest of the world and users from across the world can actually start using your application, somebody in those users, or maybe somebody who has it out for your company, is going to attack your application, and then you're going to get hacked, and then there's going to be a lawsuit or there's going to be damages, and then you're going to be like, shit, we need to go back and secure our software. So this is one of the big things that is a really important concept to understand because everything has to do with software these days. For the most part, everybody in some capacity is using software. My 70-year-old mother uses software. She doesn't look at it from the concept of security in any way, but she uses software regularly, so you know that people are using software all over the world for everything that's done. There are billions of users across the world that are using software in some kind of capacity. So this is a very important concept to understand, and more often than not, you as a security person will end up using some kind of software. And you may not be a coder, you may not be a developer, but you need to understand security because the conversation of security in software will be coming up guaranteed. I guarantee it to you. So you need to understand this concept of the secure software development lifecycle and this concept of shifting to the left so that you can think about security earlier instead of doing it in the testing, deployment, or maintenance phases. And one last note is that when you look at the concept of DevSecOps, right? So development security operations, essentially, there's this whole idea of automating security scanning in software and source code. And there's the continuous integration, continuous deployment or development pipelines. That's what CD stands for. And so when you're looking at continuous integration or continuous deployment, continuous development, when you're looking at those pipelines, very similar to what we just looked at, that graphic that we just looked at, you want to use some kind of a tool to automate the security scanning of these things so that as people are developing, as people are coding, as people are integrating, as they're doing the work of building the software, there is something in the background that's just looking at it and saying, hey, this is a security issue. You need to find a different way to do this block of code or to do what you're trying to do in this segment so that it's not a security issue. And so DevSecOps is this concept of automating the security scanning and the analysis of the source code and the analysis of the web application as a whole to be able to point out the security vulnerabilities and to ideally steal while you're inside of the development and the design phases before you go into testing. You would fix whatever the vulnerabilities are so that it makes testing and deployment and maintenance just much easier to do. And then we have security policies and compliance. So the acceptable use policy, don't use your laptop for porn, right? Or don't visit certain websites when you're on the work computer, like anything like that. You can't use the printer in your office to print the flyers for your next party. Like certain things where it's like, dude, there's certain use cases for the equipment inside of this place. There are certain use cases for the location itself. You can't just invite your friends and have a potluck at your lunchroom inside of work, because it's literally for employees of the company. So what you can and cannot do with the facilities, what you can and cannot do with the equipment, is falling under the acceptable use policy. And a big piece of that is actually security. So if you invite somebody that's not an employee of the company and they come to the break room, we don't know what this person's like. You may trust them, but we don't know them. We don't trust them. And you can't just invite people into this place. You can't you can't take the laptop if you're not supposed to take your laptop outside of the building, outside of the office. You can't take your laptop to go use it for homework or whatever it is that you're doing. We have no idea what network you're going to connect to and what the people for that network sitting in Starbucks are thinking about or what they're doing. People literally sit in the parking lot at Starbucks and they just sniff traffic using Wireshark or using a variety of different tools just so they could see if they can hack into somebody's account. Like, that's a real thing that actually happens. Free public Wi-Fi is a real thing that ends up being a big security issue. So don't use your sensitive equipment in that. Like, I never use or I never log into my bank account application from my phone using public Wi-Fi. And more often than not, if I can avoid it, I just won't even connect to the Wi-Fi at the coffee shop, because I actually have hotspot on my phone and the connection from my phone to my laptop is password protected. So I can just use the hotspot on my phone to power my laptop if I need internet access on my laptop, right? So it's like there's certain things that you can just do to make sure that none of those things become an issue for you. And acceptable use policy just is kind of all encompassing. It covers all of those things. Then we have the incident response policy. So how to handle security breaches, right? So we actually are currently inside of the incident response module for the SOC level 2 pathway. So as I'm writing content or creating content for PenTest Plus right now, this video is probably going to come out in a couple of weeks though. So it's like by the time that this video comes out, the incident response portion of SOC level 2 is complete. So you can actually go to the SOC level 2 playlist and look at everything for incident response, and then you'll see the various elements of handling security breaches using the incident response path or the incident response series of actions, right? The protocols inside of incident response. Then we have the data retention policy. So how long sensitive data should be stored, how it should be stored also goes under data retention policy. So how it needs to be encrypted, if there's going to be backups made, where it needs to go, if it's really sensitive information, and for whatever case we're worried about losing that sensitive information or not getting access to that sensitive information because we lose power or something, then we need to have physical printouts of that information, and that needs to be stored in a vault type of a room that is fireproof and there won't be any kind of an issue with it. There are so many different things that fall under data retention, and then data loss prevention as well. So data retention and data loss prevention really are two sides of the same coin, because they all define the policies and procedures for managing and dealing with sensitive data. So data retention policy specifically talks about how long the data should be stored, and if we don't need it after a year, we need to wipe that data, because it could leave us liable, or it could just be taking up space in our storage systems. And everybody does this, like government agencies do it as well. If you have a case with a superior court, they will not hold on to your case files forever because it's taking up space. and after a certain number of years, the statute of limitations passes, and they just wipe all of that stuff. They shred all of those documents. They wipe the data because it's taking up space. And that's one of the bigger reasons why there is even a data retention policy. But there is also just the concept of liability, that if somebody gets access to this information, they can do malicious things with this information, and we would be held liable for it, and we could be sued, etc., etc. So security policies are very, very important. There are a lot of different security policies, most likely within your company, whatever company you're going to end up working for. There are going to be other security policies, but these are the most common that actually apply to every single company. So for example, acceptable use policy is going to apply to every single company, as well as data retention, because every company now deals with data. So data retention policy is also going to apply to every single company. Incident response policy is going to apply to every single company. So there are these general policies and compliance that apply to everybody, but then there's industry specific policies and companies, and then there is company specific policies and companies where compliance, that actually applies to your given industry, or it applies to your given company, and maybe even your given department inside of that company. And then of course there's security policies that would apply to your unique role inside of the department inside of that company. So there are different versions of these policies and compliance that you have to adhere to in order to keep your job, really. Our next level of control would be the operational control protocols, and these focus on the day-to-day security operations, the day-to-day operations of the company, and how that actually relates to security and what the security protocols are for operations. These are focused on reducing human error and any kind of an insider threat. And it may not necessarily be a conscious insider threat. It could be somebody that really doesn't know that what they're doing is a threat to the company, and they're working from the inside because they're one of the employees of the company. So that ends up being an insider threat. So this is what operational controls is designed to handle. And job rotation and separation of duties is one of the key elements of this. So it reduces the insider threat by limiting employee access over time. That's what job rotation is. And then that would be the separation of duties, is where one person should not have too much control over critical systems. So one of the key elements of this is that, when a nuclear bomb is supposed to be launched, or it's going to be launched, you need multiple people with different keys to be present, and for both of them or all of them to be involved in turning the key to actually activate the thing. Inside of banking or inside of any environment where there is a vault that's present, there's not one person that can access the vault. There's actually multiple codes that are distributed to the different people, and one of them would be management, the other one would be kind of lower staff, and both of those people need to be present because both of their keys or both of their codes have to be used to log into or enter the vault, I should say, to get into that specific system. So the separation of duties is a really great approach operationally to enforce security. And so if somebody gets into the bank and they want to do something, or if somebody gets into the building and they want to do something, if somebody gets into your system and they want to do something, by having separation of duties, that person now needs multiple layers of access to be able to do whatever it is that they're trying to do. So it's very, very important, and it's a really important security concept, and it applies to physical security as well as digital security. So we want to reduce insider threats by limiting employee access over time, and we want to prevent one person from having too much control over critical systems or critical infrastructure. Another element under operational controls would be user training and security awareness. And as we've already established, and I say this all the freaking time, human error is the biggest or the weakest link in the security chain. And 90% of freaking breaches involve human error, because as long as the systems, I'm hiccuping. As long as the systems are patched, right? As long as the systems are patched, as long as everything is updated regularly, there really isn't that much that can be done against a system or a software because it's just secure. So the hacker then they resort to social engineering to take advantage of human error. So they'll send a really interesting email to try to get somebody to open an attachment or click on something. Weak passwords, just not having strong password policies can resort to somebody saying, okay, my password is 1234567 8. That's his password. And it's like, okay, bro, what the hell, dude? So that's on the dictionary list, right? So the RockQ password list is like, it has over like 15 million weak passwords that have been stored over time, that somebody can just use John the Ripper or Hydra, and then they'll use one of these password lists, and then they can predict your password, right? So it's so easy to do, especially if you think that the human being is lackadaisical, they procrastinate, they don't pay attention. There are so many different reasons why somebody would make a mistake like that. So 90% of breaches involve human error. And this is one of the big things that you're trying to address when you focus on operational controls. And operational controls involve user training. It's one of the biggest things. There needs to be regular user training. When you get a license with a state authority to do any kind of transaction, there's something called continuing education that needs to be done every single year, because not only do you need to be reminded of all of the foundational principles of whatever you're doing, but there's things that happen that they're now updated in the industry, and so now you need to be up to date on the stuff that's happening inside of your industry with your given license. And there's, of course, user training that is done regularly as a part of the auditing process of a company, where they'll track to see, hey, did this person finish their training? And it's like, no, dude, you haven't finished your training. You are now non-compliant because you haven't finished your training. And now you're leaving us at risk for failing the audit. So you need to get on that, right? So there are a lot of different ways that you can enforce that people are completing their training. And even I know that certain companies actually give you like a pay raise on your hourly wage or on your salary or something like that if you actually finish the user training that's been assigned to you, because it's just better for the company if you're fully aware of everything that's going on and you're more informed. Therefore, you are worth more. Your dollar value is higher because you're better trained and you are more diligent and aware. So conducting regular awareness training, for example, phishing simulations, right? Or tabletop exercises or penetration tests, right? Or threat emulation, which is considered to be purple teaming, where red team and blue team combine forces, or the person who's handling the threat emulation is focused on purple team type exercises, where that person is looking at everything inside of the system from a red teamer as well as a blue teamer, from a pen tester as well as a security engineer. They look at both of those concepts, and all of that falls under awareness training as well. And I mean, threat emulation doesn't necessarily fall under awareness training, but at the very least, if you do a phishing simulation where you just send out an email to everybody in the company and don't let them know that this is a phishing simulation, and then see how many people actually click on that, then you're like, oh no, 49%, 50%, 70% of our employees just clicked on this freaking link. We are screwed if this happens in real life. So this is one of those things that is just it's so important. It's so important and it's so powerful. It can actually have a really, really strong impact on the company. And when you do this regularly, then people are just hyper aware and they're always on their toes. Therefore, your company is more secure. Access restrictions and monitoring also falls under operational control. So implementing geo-blocking to prevent login from unauthorized countries or even states, right? So geo-blocking means that this specific system or IP address cannot be accessed by anybody outside of the United States, or this specific system or IP address cannot be accessed by anybody outside of this building. That's actually a very powerful way of doing geo-blocking as well. So it's one of those ways that you kind of force that only that system can be accessed from having local access. So the attack vector, when you look at a CVSS, when you look at the scoring system, one of the categories of that scoring system is the attack vector. And it could be local or it could be network, right? And I think there's actually even a third one as well. It's kind of slipping my mind right now. But local means what? You have to be on that specific computer to do whatever the vulnerability is, right? Network means that you essentially just need to be connected to that network. You could do it from a remote location. So obviously the local version of the vulnerability is less severe than the network version, because the person no longer has to be inside of the building. They no longer have to be on that specific computer. They could actually do it from a different country. So if you have vulnerabilities that, or if you may not even have it, but if you're worried about those types of vulnerabilities, then you implement geo-blocking. So a person cannot log into that system unless they're inside a given building or inside a given city, right? Or inside a given state or inside a given country. Somebody from New York should not be able to access the system that's inside of California. Somebody from Vegas should not be able to access Texas, vice versa. So this is considered to be geo-blocking. And then we have time-based access restrictions, which means that from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, this system is available. Anything outside of that is not available. So somebody trying to access 3 a.m. at Pacific Standard Time, they're not even going to be able to do it because they are not even allowed to do it, right? So it's a time-based access restriction. So you stack geo-blocking with time-based access restriction, and now it becomes very, very difficult to do it, because somebody could actually get a VPN server, or they could get a proxy server that's inside the United States, and they can make it seem like they're coming from inside the United States, but they're doing it at 3 a.m. And it's like, oh, no, you definitely can't do that, right? So you have multiple layers of restrictions here. And then we, of course, would monitor the user activity with SIEM tools like Splunk or Elasticstack or Azure Sentinel. And there are many videos on this channel that use Splunk, many videos on this channel that use Elk or Elasticstack. So those are really, really powerful tools, and user activity being monitored with those tools can be done in a live environment. This is why there's a security operations center that, and a lot of times it's running 24/7. So there are people that are looking at these tools and the activity inside of those tools. And if there's any kind of an alert that pops up, they're immediately addressing it. And then you can also use a SOAR that goes hand in hand with a SIEM. A SOAR is Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. And the SIEM tool more alerts you. It analyzes traffic and it gives you alerts, but it's up to the security analyst to take the action necessary to prevent the attack from going further or responding to the incident. A SOAR tool automatically responds. You orchestrate your security responses, and then you automatically have the tool respond to it. So they'll block an IP address, or they'll isolate a network segment, etc. So very, very powerful set of tools that are available, and these all help with operational controls. Technically, SIEM tools can actually also fall under technical controls, technically, because it's a tool that's being used. But for this particular case, we're looking at monitoring and restrictions for access and things like that, and it falls under the monitoring segment of operational controls. And finally, we have physical controls. And physical security is actually overlooked very frequently, but this actually plays a really, really big role in preventing unauthorized access to systems or parts of your building or the building in general. There's something called tailgating and piggybacking. And tailgating and piggybacking is essentially when somebody follows an authorized person who has a key card to get into the system. And I've done this before. I've actually done this, and it's kind of scary. People literally just hold the door open for me, and I'm like, hey, so can you hold the door? And like you have a stack of coffees in your hand, right? And both of your hands are occupied, so you can't access the thing. So it's like, hey, can you hold the thing for the door? And then it's like, even if somebody says, well, I can't, you need a security card, it's like, okay, it's in my pocket. Do you want to reach in my pocket? And they're like, oh, fine, never mind. And they just let you in because they don't want to deal with the discomfort of reaching into your pants pocket when you actually don't have anything in your pants pocket. So there are so many different ways to do this. So tailgating and piggybacking, and we talk about this in Security Plus as well. So if you go look at that Security Plus playlist, then you'll get a lot of examples of this. But physical security is a big deal, and a lot of times it's overlooked, and employees are just not aware, right? They either don't watch when somebody's tailgating them, and then they, instead of making sure that the door closes behind them, they don't pay attention because they're on their freaking phone. And so all I have to do is just be fast enough to, before the door closes, I just put my foot right between the door, and then I keep the door open. Or they piggyback, and they're like, hey, can you open the door? Can you hold the door for me? And then they hold the door open for them just because they're not aware, right? Or they don't want to deal with the discomfort of saying, I don't know you and I have no idea whether you have access to do this. You got to go through the front gate, etc. One of those things. So biometrics and multi-layer authentication is a big part of this. So using fingerprint scanners, retina scans, or facial recognition for access control. This is actually really, really important. You see this a lot in spy movies, right? So fingerprint scanners, retina scans. Retina scans I haven't seen in real life myself, but I would assume that like government agencies have these kinds of things where like you put your face to it and it scans your freaking eyes, right? That's a big one. Facial recognition is on every iOS device. So if you actually have a cell phone that is an Apple phone, an iPhone, it actually will scan your face for facial recognition before it unlocks your phone. Implementing multi-layered authentication is actually a really big deal as well. So multi-layered authentication for high security areas, meaning you need to have one type of key card to enter the building, then you need to have a second type of key card to enter this other segment of the building, and you need to do your fingerprint to get in. And then when you want to get into the third part of the building, you need your key card, your fingerprint, and you need your retina scan to be able to get into the third part. Or you can just say that, you know, you have access control rules that are assigned to those key cards, but if somebody steals the key card, then they can now get into these sensitive areas. So you want to have key card, fingerprint, PIN code, as well as a retina scan. You know what I mean? It's like super high layered security, and it's multi-layered. So it's very, very important, especially if you're dealing with a high security area or a high sensitivity area. You need to make sure that you have these multi-layered authentications. Video surveillance and security logs are a really big deal as well. So CCTV cameras in data centers and server rooms, and just making sure that the IP address of those freaking cameras are not publicly accessible. There is a very simple query that you can drop into Google to access CCTV camera feeds that are publicly available, which is insane when you think about it. Storing video footage for at least 90 days for forensic analysis is a part of security logging, and just making sure that you actually have that as well. Video footage is really large files, so they take up a lot of space. So storing that video footage for at least 90 days is a really big, it takes up a lot of space, and if you don't have enough storage, it can be very daunting. So you just need to make sure that you have the storage available for it, which is also why CCTV camera feeds are usually not really high resolution, because the lower the resolution, the less amount of space that it takes. So it's usually not high resolution, it's usually not in color and things like that, just to kind of save space as you're storing that video footage. But at the very least, you got to make sure that, especially if it's CCTV cameras that are in specific rooms that are sensitive rooms, they should not be publicly accessible. I usually run this, and I haven't run it in a while, so I'm going to run it right now again, just so you can see what the query is that you can just drop into Google. This is kind of called, this is called Google dorking or Google hacking. And I'm going to try to see if I can run it and still find CCTV cameras that are publicly available, but usually it works. So let's see if we can actually find some more. All right, so here's a simple one. So if we do in title : and inside quotes do WebCam XP5, for example, you will end up seeing certain links like this, where you do WebCam XP5 and then you see an IP address that it's not HTTPS, it's just HTTP. And then you have the IP address itself, and then we click on it, and it'll open up a feed to a webcam. And then I can even click down, I think, right? Can I do click down or something like that? Or zoom in? Can I zoom in on this? I can't. So, or maybe I can, and it just won't do it very well. But this is a feed. I have no idea where this is, but it's a live feed that's going on right now, and we don't know where it is. So let's see. There are a lot of different ways to do this. That's the thing that's kind of like really crazy to think about, that websites are not, or people who use webcams are not securing their webcams from public access. Exposed webcam results, so criminal IP or criminal lip, or there we go. So these are various different versions of freaking, this is another thing that's like really crazy to think about. This is on criminal IP, and then you can, let's see, if I click on this, is it going to show me something? So if I do this, and then let's copy it, and then let's go to this location and see what we can find. This kind of stuff is like really, really crazy to think about. Oh no, it's copying. I want to copy this full thing. So we're going to copy that, and then we'll do port 8888. So we'll do that, do 8888, press enter, and oh, okay, great. So this actually used a username and password, so that's nice. Very good. So at the very least, that one had some kind of a security mechanism that was included here, 8082. So let's try another one. Again, I'm kind of getting distracted, so sorry, but I just wanted to show it to you because some of these things are publicly accessible, and it's as easy as doing a search on Google for something inside of the title, or you can go to a place like Shodan, which we're going to be doing in the technical element of it when we actually go through reconnaissance, where you can actually find webcams. So 115 results inside of Shodan for webcam EP.5, and then this could potentially be something that we could look at. And so let's see if we can go and actually view this specific IP address for the webcam. It's really crazy to think about, dude. It's really crazy to think about that these things could actually be publicly accessible and so easily scannable and accessible. And I guess this is the feed for this one, that if we got it, we would be able to see it. This is another feed for this one. This is another feed for this one. This is somebody's house. Look at that. That is somebody's freaking house. That's insane. And here's what's crazy about Shodan. It actually shows you the location. So United States, San Diego, Cox Communications. It's really, really scary to think about when you look at these things. It's just like, what are you people thinking, bro? Why would you do something like this to yourself? And I mean, they don't know. The poor person doesn't know. They just wanted to set it up for themselves. Oh, this guy has a freaking webcam on his aquarium. That's interesting. This looks like a webcam inside of a store, it seems. These things are dangerous. I'm telling you, like, somebody just all it takes is for somebody to know, oh, I can't get any more without creating or logging into my Shodan account. But all it takes is for somebody to know how to run certain queries into Google, or how to use a tool like Shodan.io, and then they'll go ahead and get access to information. So what is this? This is a TrendNet wireless night camera. It's too much, bro. It's too much. Like, it's really scary to think about if somebody doesn't actually use these things, or if somebody isn't aware of these things, and then they don't configure their stuff to look at it, to customize it, or harden it, as we've already established. They don't do the things that's necessarily to harden their cameras and their security infrastructure, and then they leave themselves open into potential reconnaissance that's done like this. And it's scary to think about, is all I'm going to say. So the easiest way that you can find things like this is like buy a CCTV camera and look at what the URL will look like and what the headers of the URL will look like for your CCTV camera. And then you can start Googling to see if you can find other ones across the world. And just like that easily, you can find a bunch of CCTV feeds, just like you just saw right now. And then I'm not going to say do it, but there's a lot of things that you can do with that. And of course, you can always go to the exploit database that we're going to be talking about in future videos for PenTest Plus as well, that you can get a lot of information about various queries that you can run, and going to the Google hacking databases and trying to find a variety of different things over here. So I can even do a search inside of Google hacking, and then we can do in title webcam, in URL webcam HTM, and I can go here and I can search that, and then now I can get Lise McRae webcam for, I don't know what this is, but this is Lise McRae's webcam, and look at that. Now you actually have the feed over. It's crazy how easy it is to do something like this. And oh, Unico's webcam, is there open? It is. Look, Unico also has a webcam, and this is actually a place where I'm sure that we can actually find information about their location, simply because of the fact that it seems like a business. So just too many things. There are too many things that are available that you can get access to by looking at various information or various links, by knowing how to pull up various links to log into these feeds and get access to these feeds. And it's scary to think about, my friend. I'm just telling you. But I digress and I got distracted, so I apologize. Let's go ahead and finish up this section and then get into the practice questions. Our final security control for physical controls would be the vestibule, also known as a mantrap, which is a really, really interesting concept as well. And they do use this a lot in banks to prevent robbers from actually leaving the building. And just the existence of it deters a lot of people from breaking into the bank. So it prevents unauthorized tailgating into secure facilities, and it also prevents people from escaping the building. So it requires dual authentication, which is badge plus biometric for entry, or it requires both of the doors to be closed in order for another door to be open. So you can't have both doors open at the same time, right? And then what happens is that once the doors are both closed, you can technically lock the room. You can lock the man trap. So let me show you what it actually looks like. So we have a few different versions of this. So this is just a good graphic to kind of wrap our head around it. So there's two doors, right? And both of them cannot be open at the same time. This door, for example, in order for this door to open, this door has to be closed. And then in order for this door to open, this door has to be closed. So you can't have them both open at the same time. Now what happens is that somebody enters through this door, they close the door, and as soon as that happens, you just lock down the entire room. Now they can't open either of the doors and they're stuck inside the room, and you have now captured your culprit. Another version of it is these rotating doors. I'm sure you've gone through these before, and these things can also lock you in. So it's like somebody can just stop it from rotating, and now you're stuck in between these different areas and you can't escape. So that's another version of a man trap. And then we have this version, which is the version that I've seen a lot inside of the bank, or that's actually a really fancy version of it. I want to say this one. This is like usually what I see when I worked in banking, where, you come in from the outside, this door has to close in order for these doors to actually open for you to enter the bank. And then same thing when you're leaving, these doors have to close in order for those doors to open so you can leave the building. And in any case, if somebody is a malicious actor, if somebody's trying to hack, or not hack, if somebody's trying to rob you or get into the building, or you can kind of see that they come, I don't know, you can see their gun or something, or they're wearing an outfit or a mask that just seems malicious or something like that. Not like a COVID mask or anything, but like some kind of a mask that is like they're wearing the Nixon mask that they pull over their head, and it's like, oh, that looks like somebody's trying to rob us. So it's like you just go ahead and do that, and immediately you just lock them, and then you don't even let them come in, right? So that's kind of a thing that ends up being very, very useful. So man traps in general are just really, really great forms of physical security to prevent people from either entering or leaving the building. And this is another one that's a single man trap that's rotating. And again, you would have to go through the whole thing, and by the time that it opens on the other side, there's a bunch of security on the other side. And if you're trying to leave the building, they can just lock it and prevent you from leaving. And then the police shows up and you're under arrest. So man traps, really, really powerful stuff. They're also known as vestibules, access control vestibules, but man trap is like the common term for them. Which brings us to our practice questions for section 1.5. And as always, we have multiple formats for our practice questions, and these are aligned with the PenTest Plus examination. So you're going to see multiple choice questions. You're going to see multiple response questions, meaning selecting two or more of the answers. And then there's performance-based questions. So scenario-based stuff, drag and drop, matching questions. Inside of the slideshow that I have, there's no drag and drop or matching. There's mostly scenario-based stuff. But inside of this document that you're looking at right here, there's a bunch of scenario drag and drop and matching questions. And of course, if you are a part of Hackaholics Anonymous, you will get access to this document as a part of being an agent and above. So this is not available for supporters. We love our supporters, and they get their own Discord server. They get early access to content and a few other benefits as well. But for the people who become advanced members as agents, guardians, or masters, they get access to all of these documents, including the practice question slideshow as well. So And then a big part of the performance-based stuff is also what we're going to go through with the exercises that we're going to run, with the techniques that we're going to implement, so that when you see a command, for example, that is going to be entered into a terminal, you need to know what that command is going to do, or they may run the command and then they'll show you the output of that command, and then you need to know what that output is saying. So that also falls under performance-based types of questions, and we're going to go through all of that when we actually get into the techniques and the exercises that we're going to run, so you really understand what they look like, how to run them, and how to analyze them. So for now, we're going to go through the practice question slideshow. All right, so here we go, analyzing findings and providing remediation. So first question is multiple choice. Which of the following is an example of system hardening? Disabling unused services and ports, that's great. Using the same administrator password across all servers, allowing unrestricted outbound traffic on a firewall, disabling multi-factor authentication for remote access. So disabling MFA is not security, so you're making it weaker. Allowing unrestricted outbound traffic on a firewall is not necessarily a security concept. You want to allow outbound traffic on a firewall so people from inside the network can access the internet. Using the same admin password across all servers is really weak. It's very bad security, so you definitely don't want to do that. So unused services and ports would be my answer. And there we go, disabling unused services and ports. Great. Which of the following are common technical controls for reducing attack services? So select 2. So we want to reduce attack services. Enforcing MFA for all remote access, regularly applying security patches and software updates, relying solely on antivirus software without additional controls, using hard-coded credentials in application source code. We already talked about this, so this is actually a really big mistake. So we definitely don't want to use hard-coded credentials. Relying solely on antivirus software without an intrusion detection system or a SIM or anything like that is also not a good idea. So enforcing multi-factor and regularly applying security patches would be a really good idea. There we go. Which of the following best describes the role-based access control? This is a multiple choice question, so one response here. So what best describes RBAC? Users are granted access based on their job roles and responsibilities. I mean, that would be the answer. Every user is given full administrator access. No. Users must request access to every resource. That's probably not it either. You don't want to force them to manually request access to every resource all the time. That's not a good idea. Permissions are randomly assigned without, that's obviously not a good answer. So A would be the answer there, access granted based on job roles and responsibilities. Which of the following are best practices for enforcing secure software development? So we're choosing 2, and we talked about this as well. So hard coding was a bad idea, right? So you don't want to do things like that. So conducting regular security code reviews, that's great. Implementing secure coding guidelines like OWASP secure coding practices, that's great. Releasing software updates without testing for vulnerabilities, not a good idea. Storing sensitive data in plain text, not a good idea. So A and B would be the answer. Which of the following is an example of an operational security control, right? So this is how the business operates, the day-to-day operations here. So implementing job rotation to prevent fraud, great. Encrypting sensitive data stored on a server. I think that's a good thing to do, but it doesn't fall under operational security. Blocking known malicious IP addresses using firewall, that's also not operational security. Installing IDS, not operational. So A would be the answer. All of these things are good things to do. It's just that they don't fall under operation. So A would be the answer here. Which of the following measures improve security awareness among employees? So 2 of these things. Conducting phishing awareness training, yes. Clear acceptable use policy, yes. Allowing employees to use the same password indefinitely, no. Encouraging employees to disable security features, no. For convenience, no, bro. So A and B would be our answers here. Multiple choice, which of the following is an example of a physical security control? Implementing biometric authentication for server room access, so physical security. Implementing biometric, yes. Requiring users to rotate their passwords every 90 days, it's not a physical security thing. Encrypting a database containing customer information, not a physical security thing. Applying least privilege permissions to network shares, not a physical security. So all of these things are good practices. They just don't fall under physical security. Only the first one falls under physical security. Select 2 here. Which of the following are considered effective physical security controls? Again, so physical security here. Installing video surveillance in critical areas, yes. Installing access control vestibule, Mantrap, yes. Allowing employees to enter the server room without authentication, that's not a good idea at all. Disabling security cameras, no. So A and B. Scenario here. So a pen tester discovers that an organization's web application is vulnerable to SQL injection attacks. The vulnerability allows attackers to retrieve sensitive customer data. What are the best remediation steps for this? To implement input validation and prepared statements? Yes. Use parameterized queries instead of string concatenation? Yes. Remove all authentication requirements? No. Store all SQL queries in plain text? Also no. So A and B would be our answer. Great. And okay, so that was it. So for section 1.5, all the questions are one of these things where you really have to understand that we are forbidden by signing NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and it's just against the law to distribute actual questions from the CompTIA examination. So everything that I've done so far in Network Plus, Security Plus, Linux Plus, and of course in PenTest Plus is as close to the information as the questions as I can possibly get for you, and mainly just to get you to understand how to think about this content and these questions so that you can really wrap your head around the content itself and understand the information instead of trying to memorize questions. You will never pass these examinations by memorizing questions. The only way that you can do it is to understand the content. So as long as you understand the content, you'll be in good shape, which is why everything has been structured the way that it is, and I give examples the way that I do, and I over-explain things because I really just want to make sure that you really understand them. So if you study and if you actually take the time to go through all this stuff, you will be in good shape, and I feel very confident that you will pass. That being said, that was it for section 1.5, and we're officially done with module 1, which is engagement, and we are going to then graduate to the techniques and everything that will be in module 2. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comment section below, and make sure that you like, subscribe, and share, and drop a comment and all that good stuff. Turn on notification bell so that you get notified the next time that a video comes out on PenTest Plus. And of course, you're going to get a quick little message on how you can get access to these practice questions and the notes document with everything else that's inside of it in a couple of seconds. I hope you had a good one. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Later. To get the PenTest Plus notes, practice questions, and to join a supportive community of like-minded people like you, consider joining the Hackaholics Anonymous membership community. We have 4 tiers: the supporter, the agent, the guardian, and the master. And each tier gets their own Discord server and early access to content. The agent, guardian, and master levels will get exclusive content like line-by-line code explanations for how to create cybersecurity and PenTest Plus scripts, like exclusive downloads that they will get. For example, the notes document for this PenTest Plus and everything that I'm using for the lectures, as well as all of the practice questions and everything else that will go along that will be made for the scripts and everything else that we're going to be doing for the PenTest Plus training series. There will be free pre-made monthly Python automations that have to do with system administration, cybersecurity defense, as well as, of course, PenTest Plus and ethical hacking. And then there's going to be monthly live streams with me every single month, plus so many other things that you would get as a part of being a member of Hackaholics Anonymous in these tiers. To join, you can simply click the link in the description below, or you can go to our homepage and click the join button there, or you can go to youtube.com/@HankHacksHackers/join, and you'll be able to join Hackaholics Anonymous.